I'm not on mute, am I? No. So welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us from many parts of the world at different time zones. So we're really very appreciative of the people that are coming from the other side of the Atlantic, because it's really very early for them. I'd like to welcome you to the second of a three-part series where we're looking at the effects of transport poverty, the lack of access caused by not having roads, not having transportation, and often the best solution are bicycles. So we are, in partnership with the World Bicycle Relief, putting together this panel on an issue which I think hasn't really been put forward enough, in the issue of the rights to mobility, and that can cover very many aspects of mobility. Today, we're looking at the effect of mobility in terms of access, particularly for girls, to education. And I will just say a few words about Giving Women. We are a Swiss-based association, a membership association made up of women who together we work on building capacity for programs and projects that are working to improve the lives of women and girls in the greatest need and in the most vulnerable communities. One of the parts of our work is to bring awareness about what are the challenges that these girls and women are facing throughout the world. And so this is part of that branch of our work. We are very grateful to our fantastic moderator, Lauren Rumble, who is a senior advisor to UNHCR, particularly on gender issues. We'd like to thank her very much for a returning moderation, because she's done it once for us before. So we always feel very happy when people come back and want to do it again with us. We must have done something right. And also I would like to thank our panelists, because this may be only an hour and a half that you see us, but there has been a lot of work that's gone into really developing a panel that touches on all the issues, but also is a call to action. So there's a lot to get into this 1.5 hours. So I would just like to welcome our panelists. I'd like to welcome, and I'm doing it in alphabetical order, so there's no hierarchy in the way that I present. So I'd like to welcome Nicole Haberland, who's a senior associate at Population Council. My dear friend, Safina Hussain, who is the founder and board member of Educate Girls. We go back a long way, Safina, and you're really in my heart. Winnie Sambu, who is a research and education manager for World Bicycle Relief, and Susan Silka, who is the director, country director of for Malawi of CAMFED. And so we're extremely lucky to have such accomplished and knowledgeable panel. And I would like to thank them on behalf of Giving Women for joining us today. On that, I will pass it on now to Lauren, who will take over. Thank you very much to our participants, to our panelists, to everyone, and Kathleen and Susan for putting this all together. Lauren, it's to you now.
Thank you so much, Atalanti. What a wonderful opportunity it is to be joined by so many friends from around the world. I recognize so many of your names and faces. My name is Lauren Rumble. A small correction, I actually work for UNICEF, although I love the work of UNHCR. Very critical right now during the Ukraine crisis. All sisters, all, no problem. That's what we want, one UN for everybody. So we're going to have an intimate conversation today. So I look forward to a very vibrant chat box. You can immediately put into the chat box, if you like, what you understand to be transport mobility, transport poverty or mobility poverty. Atalanti gave us some clues with a definition. While I just set the scene a little for us, you know, we know that education is in crisis right now. Over 600 million students, that's children and young people around the world, have been affected by more than 2 years of the pandemic. And what does that crisis it really is an education crisis, for girls specifically. Our own research here at UNICEF, together with UNFPA, estimates an additional 10 million child brides who are going to be affected by the pandemic and the school closures. We also estimate around 11 million additional adolescent girls dropping out of school, never to return, because of all the persistent social norms barriers that they face around care, work at home, responsibilities, and a deepening crisis of poverty around the world. So together with climate change, poverty, and the ongoing effects of the pandemic, never mind recent crises like the Ukraine or what's happening in Afghanistan, we know that girls are facing tremendous challenges to get to and stay at school. So today we'll be looking at a range of some of those barriers from the groundbreaking research a couple of the panelists will share with us, and we'll be doing a deep dive on mobility poverty or transport poverty. And here's a clue to the answer, where World Bicycle Relief is really focusing in on and is the star of the show today. Transport poverty is the inability to actually pay for transport, and mobility poverty refers to a lack of options for mobility or transport. Simply put, it means that girls are finding it very hard to get to school, even when their homes are conducive to it and their families want to support them, and there is a school nearby. So we want to conquer this and the other challenges. We're going to talk about a little more about what those challenges look like, and more importantly, what the solutions are. What are those recommendations we want to take forward with policymakers, programmers like me, so that we can do something about those terrible numbers that we're facing. Let me start first. Okay, excuse me 1 second here. Let me start first with you, Safina. You've been doing some really, really powerful work for and with girls. Tell us a little bit about your vision and the work that Education Girls does. We look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Lauren. And first and foremost, I just want to thank my friend Atalanti for inviting me. I know I gave you a lot of stress, but it's just a very difficult time with COVID. So I'm really happy that you are organizing this panel, because I think COVID, I call it the shadow pandemic, has impacted girls very, very, very severely, and specifically adolescent girls. And so very briefly about Educate Girls, I started it about 15 years ago. And really the genesis of it was, I mean, I grew up in a lot of poverty, violence and abuse, and education was transformative in my life. I received a lot of help from people and ended up becoming the first person in my family to go overseas for college, go to London School of Economics. And it was just this journey that when I started Educate Girls, I felt very strongly that is the door to growing up in a one-room apartment where you cook in corridors, to actually be able to realize, your potential. That's really, it's an extension of my personal journey as to why I started this organization. And in 15 years, we have grown from about a small pilot of 50 schools to today we work across 20,000 villages in India and are adding another 4,000 villages this year. Essentially serving almost 2 million children daily. More than half of them are girls. And what we do is very simple. We go door to door in all of our villages, and we find every single girl that's not going to school. And we do this through our smartphone, through an app where everything is geotagged, so we can build heat maps very quickly on where the out of school girls are. And then we build a community mobilization program of bringing them back into the closest government school. And once the girls are in school, we're supporting them through learning, whether it's, foundational literacy, numeracy, life skills programming, etc. I want to touch a little bit upon, the pandemic has really kind of upended things from what we're seeing on the ground. You mentioned some of the numbers, Lauren, and absolutely agree with you. We see exponential increases, whether it's going to be child marriage or girls coming out of school. I want to remind everyone that India actually had one of the strictest lockdowns, where our schools were closed for over 500 days. To put that in perspective, a girl who was in 7th grade when the pandemic struck in March 2020 is today in the 9th grade, and a rural girl would have had no access to online or any kind of schooling. These girls are never coming back into school, because there's no kid who thinks from grade 7, I can go to passing a 9th grade or a 10th grade exam. So the situation that we're facing is that we may lose an entire generation of girls. because of the pandemic, many are now married, therefore they can't come back into mainstreaming. So it is a very, very critical and urgent situation. And I think transport and mobility is definitely a large part of it, because the biggest reason given a lot of the times is, oh, she's now got her periods, how is she going to go? And schools are far, especially for the older girls. So thank you for that. And just, I'll summarize by saying, I think girls' education and all gender issues by impacted what I call the 2 Ps, poverty and patriarchy. And the pandemic has made both of those much, much, much worse. Really, so wiping out some of the progress that we had made in the last decade or so.
Thank you, Safina, for that very powerful introduction, and congratulations on the amazing work that you do. I understand you might have a short video for us. Is that correct?
Yeah, I can share that now.
Because I was like, I don't have it.
No, we have the tech angel in Kathleen. Please go ahead.
उनका जैसा स्तर है वो उसी प्रकार का सोचते हैं कि हम पढ़े नहीं है तो हमारी ज़िंदगी निकल गई, तो हमारे बच्चे भी इसी खेतों में अपनी ज़िंदगी निकाल सकते हैं। दूसरा, काम का आर्थिक स्थिति के कारण कि हमारे घर में कमाएगा नहीं तो लाएगा कौन, और हम कमाने जाएंगे तो घर में रहेगा कौन, इन बच्चों को कौन संभालेगा, हम बच्चे संभालेंगे तो कमाने कौन जाएगा। तो उस स्थिति में जो बच्ची 5वीं 6वीं पढ़ लेती है, उसके बाद उस बच्ची का पढ़ना छुड़वा के घर के कामों में लगा देते कि बेटा ये कर। ये लड़की पहले तो स्कूल जा रही थी पास के गांव में, जो प्राइवेट स्कूल से वहाँ पे पढ़ रही थी, जब इसके पिताजी कुवैत रहते थे। जब उसके पिताजी की तबीयत खराब होने के बाद कुवैत से रिटर्न हुए, उसके बाद उनके घर की स्थिति ऐसी नहीं थी कि वो बच्ची को आगे पढ़ाई के लिए भेज सके। तो हम उस बच्ची के घर पे गए फील्ड कोऑर्डिनेटर रवीना के साथ, और उसके माता पिता को कन्वे किया कि ये बच्ची इस स्कूल में, पास के जो भी बच्चे वो भी, और उसका बड़ा भाई मनीष वो पहले से इस स्कूल में एनरोल्ड था। तो उन लोगों को अवेयर करने के लिए हमने सरपंच के साथ और संस्था प्रधान के साथ और वार्ड पंच एसएमसी सदस्य उन सबको लेके एक बार ग्राम शिक्षा सभा, जब हमने जुलाई में स्कूल खोली तो एक बड़े स्तर की मीटिंग की थी। जैसा कि मोनिका का एडमिशन हुआ, एडमिशन के पश्चात उसके ठहराव के लिए भी हमने नियमित रूप से महीने में 1 या 2 बार उसके घर पे विशेष तौर पे हम जाते थे, क्योंकि वो बच्ची हमारे लिए हार्डकोर बच्ची थी कि उसका एडमिशन करवाना था।
तो मुझे बहुत प्राउड फील होता है कि मैं पेरेंट्स को अच्छे से मोटिवेट करती हूँ कि वो लड़कियों को पढ़ाएं। लड़कियाँ भी इंसान ही होती हैं, तुम्हारी तरह होती है, उनके भी सपने होते हैं, वो भी आगे बढ़ना चाहती हैं। अगर आप अवसर ही नहीं दोगे तो वो आगे बढ़ेंगे कैसे? जैसे स्कूल भेजेंगे नहीं तो पढ़ेंगे कैसे? अगर कोशिश जारी रहती है तो फिर बदलाव आना जरूरी है, और होगा बदलाव। ज्ञान का पिटारा किट है, उसमें 3 सब्जेक्ट होते हैं, हिंदी, गणित और इंग्लिश। उसको चित्र भी दिखाया जाता है, उसको वर्ण भी अलग से बताया जाता है, शब्द भी अलग से बताते हैं। तो इसमें परिवर्तन तो देखने को मिला है। पहले क्या है, वो बहुत डरती थी, जैसे यहाँ पे लोगों के सामने ऐसे बहुत कम बोलती थी वो। पर जैसे ज्ञान का पिटारा किट जब हम लाए, हमने जब पढ़ाना शुरू किया तो बोलना स्टार्ट किया उसने।
Wow, what an amazing video. I'm struck by the line of your coordinator, Safina. We must give girls the opportunity. How else will they progress? And that's exactly right. I want to take that line and turn straight to Nicole Haberlin from the Population Council, who's done some research on exactly what those barriers to opportunity are for girls. We'd love to hear more about your research, Nicole. Can you tell us what you found and what motivated you to undertake this research?
Hi, thanks, Lauren. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay, great. Thank you. And thanks for the great video. Oh my gosh, beautiful, well done. Thank you so much to Giving Women for hosting this panel. It's an honor to be here today with everyone. As Lauren mentioned, I'm Senior Associate at the Population Council and direct the Evidence for Gender and Education Resource Program, or EAGER. We generate and synthesize evidence and try to make it more accessible for practitioners and policymakers and ourselves. One of the ways we synthesize evidence is through systematic reviews. So systematic reviews summarize what is known about a subject and help to make sense of sometimes contradictory evidence. They follow a very thorough and methodical protocol to identify all available studies on a topic. And then each study is reviewed and included only if it meets certain criteria. I've done several of these now, and they are a huge amount of work. I love them, and they're incredibly useful. When we start out, I'm always like, oh, I love this. This is so great. By the time I get to the end, it's like, oh my God, I hate this. I'm going to poke my eyes out. I can't stand it anymore. But memory is short, however, and we're about to start another one. So, but why this review? Why look at gender-related barriers to schooling? As Lauren introduced, and as Safina mentioned, despite impressive gains, there are still significant gaps in education, in many gender gaps in education in many low and middle income countries, even before COVID-related school closures. So against that backdrop, it's more important than ever that we understand what investments in education will be most effective, especially for the most at-risk groups. Now, there have been quite a few previous reviews that have been conducted on what works to improve education. And if you look quickly over all of them, there's some very consistent themes in regards to what works in education. For example, conditional cash transfers have been tested in multiple settings, multiple times, and improve girls' enrollment and attainment. And various approaches to pedagogy, to improving pedagogy, have shown benefits for learning. But looking at previous evidence, we felt there was an important gap. First, reviews were often unable to look at differences in outcomes by sex because the studies didn't disaggregate their data between boys and girls. And beyond that, they often ignored gender-related barriers to school. Those that did focus on gender were not systematic in their search process, in their inclusion or exclusion of results, and often did not rate the quality of evidence. Kathleen, could you share the slides quickly? I just have a few slides to mix it up so that you're not just looking at me. So we wanted to focus on the following questions. To what extent are barriers the same for girls and boys versus more challenging or unique to girls? What works for girls specifically, and what works to narrow gender gaps? Okay, next slide, please. We identified 18 barriers from the literature that we would explore. So from child marriage and adolescent pregnancy to school-related gender-based violence to inadequate access to school. Next slide, please. So some barriers to girls' education, such as poorly trained teachers, probably usually affect girls and boys about the same. Other barriers, such as inadequate school access, what we're talking about here today, can affect both girls and boys, but usually affect girls more because of gender norms and all sorts of underlying issues, as Safina articulately said, poverty and patriarchy. Finally, some barriers, such as child marriage, are specific to girls. Needless to say, there are a lot of barriers to education for girls. They may vary by setting, but they are prevalent and they are persistent. Okay, you can take the slides down now. Thank you so much. So our search picked up close to 26,000 citations. After screening and reviewing them, we were left with 82 studies that assessed programs that addressed at least one gender-related barrier to education. And what did we find? Well, I encourage you to read the paper or the summary. The paper's a little long, you might want to stick with the summary, but I'll post links in the chat when I'm done. But basically, we found evidence of effective programs that address three barriers: inability to afford tuition and fees, lack of adequate food, and insufficient academic support. Another three barriers came close to meeting that mark and we considered promising, and those included inability to afford school materials, lack of water and sanitation, and inadequate school access. So our review predates the study that we're going to hear about from Winnie. So I'm looking forward to doing an update of our review that includes World Bicycle Relief Study. I think they just might boost the promising to effective rating for inadequate school access. Now, what about the other 12 barriers? Well, they all need more research. For some, like school-related gender-based violence, there were few or no rigorous evaluations that had been conducted that looked at education outcomes for girls. That doesn't mean they aren't effective for other things. There's plenty of violence interventions that prevent violence. Our question was, do they improve education outcomes? And for other barriers like inadequate life skills, there was some evidence that they may be effective at improving education outcomes in some settings, but more research is needed. So there were other themes that came up, and maybe we can talk about those later as the panel continues, but that's a brief summary, and I'll share the link in the chat to the full paper. Thank you so much. Looking forward to the discussions.
Thank you so much, Nicole. And indeed, yes, do share with us the summary and the full paper. I think this is an audience that likes to get to grips with the data and really understand more what you found. 26,000 citations. That's a lot of research and reviewing. Thank you for that analysis. I'm very familiar with the work of Eager as well. Please put your web link in the chat too. If you haven't seen it yet, is the most wonderful tool to helping you design programs that are evidence-based for girls. It's got some great maps and visuals as well. I highly recommend it. So Nicole has talked us through what they found around the barriers that girls specifically face to learning. And she's pointed to a few recommendations just to whet our appetite. I'm going to turn now to Susan, so we can learn more about the fantastic work that CAMFED does on the ground to help address some of those barriers. But before we do that, let's watch a short video about your work in action. I think this is again with Kathleen, right? Okay.
Educated girls become informed women with control over their bodies and their choices. And it's informed women who become leaders. Leaders on policy, leaders spreading prosperity, leaders of climate action. Right now, most of this potential is wasted. 92% of girls in sub-Saharan Africa don't complete school and remain trapped in the cycle of poverty. That is why CAMFED unites people across the globe in common cause to break that cycle. Our global community stands alongside CAMFED's alumni, who form the largest and fastest growing movement of educated young women in Africa. They are committed to paying forward the benefits of their education to others. Together with them, we can help 5 million more girls in the next 5 years. Together, we can help today's excluded children become tomorrow's influential and compassionate activists. 5 million women who will champion others and open the door to prosperity for millions more. We will set in motion a perpetual cycle of opportunity and show the world the transformative power of female education. Join us. Together, we will shape a better future.
Whoa, I want to get up right now with those young activists and march against this crisis in education. Susan, tell us a little bit more about what we saw in the video and what your work looks like in practice.
Thanks, Lauren. You can hear me, right?
Perfectly, yeah.
All right. Thanks, Lauren, and thanks everyone who is on the call today for this opportunity. And also, as you saw in the video, CAMFED is Campaign for Female Education. It is a Pan-African movement revolutionizing how girls' education is delivered through a gold standard system of accountability to the young people and communities we serve. We've created a model that radically improves girls' prospects of becoming independent, influential women. So CAMFED catalyzes the power of the most vulnerable girls and young women to create the future they imagine for themselves, for their communities, and for Africa. CAMFED supports some of the most education excluded girls in sub-Saharan Africa to go to school, learn, not only just go to school, but thrive and lead change for their families and communities. Our programs are spearheaded by the young women, those you saw in the video, the young women leaders in the CAMFED, we call them CAMFED alumni, CAMFED association, who partner with their communities to secure every child's right to quality education. At CAMFED, we view girls' education as an entry point. We know that girls' education is a basis for female representation and leadership in all walks of life. It is linked with the social justice system, economic development, climate action. We therefore see girls' education as an entry point whereby young women who have been supported through school in turn capitalize on their education and step up as leaders of change in their communities, countries, and across Africa. CAMFED started in 1990s in Zimbabwe, and just to say, one of the first CAMFED supported scholars, girls then, is our executive director for Africa, leading Africa operations for CAMFED.
We lost her for a sec. Okay, let's see if she comes back. Susan, can you hear us?
Help them to learn, support them to succeed.
Oh, we just lost you for a sec, but keep going.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Perfectly, keep going.
All right, okay. So CAMFED serves girls and young women in improvised districts in rural South Africa, as I already said. So what we basically do is we support girls' material, financial, and social needs in order to overcome the poverty-related barriers to education. At secondary school level, this includes payment of school-going costs, provision of uniforms, shoes, stationery, menstrual items. I know Nicole talked about that as well in the research findings. And also, more importantly, the provision of a bicycle between because of the distances between home and school. So just to give a context is that schools like in Malawi, Africa, they're far apart, like maybe a minimum of 5 kilometers for one to walk to the nearest school. So that increases, it makes the learners not interested to walk such long distances to school. So there's a lot of exclusion in education in sub-Saharan Africa in multiple ways, exclusion from the education system itself. A lot of millions of children are out of school in Africa. Some have never set their feet in school to complete, to even attend education. Mostly, as I said, due to distances to school. And and also in terms of progression, like from primary to secondary schools, is also little, like only 40% of students that start primary school are able to transition to the next school. So the distances to even secondary school is even higher, secondary or high schools, is even more than the distances to primary schools. So that means the very long distances travel to school. And also there's also exclusion within the education system. Those that make it to the schools, to schools also face bottlenecks, like limited places, but also the long distances for them to walk to school, but also, as I said, some prohibitive costs, as Lorraine mentioned, the tuition and the scholastic materials. As per Lorraine's research, girls are indeed best hit in this because there are so many issues that affect them, even as the rain. They have to cycle in the rain, they have to do home chores before they do their school. So they give up sometimes to go to school because of also the issues that are on them. In terms of mobility poverty, as it was indicated, for CAMFED, we work with communities that for them a bicycle is a luxury, because even to get food is a necessity for them, and it's a struggle. So they cannot even think of buying a bicycle for their child to attend school. So as CAMFED, we believe that bicycles should be part of the package because it helps to reduce time to go to school. It helps them to give them free up more time that they can do their homeworks, even help at home in their home chores. So without bicycles, girls specifically are exposed to go into unsafe self-boarding environments, which can lead to early child marriages, as Nicole has indicated. So as CAMFED, we believe in working with the communities But as you also saw in the video, we believe in getting our young women who have been supported through the program as agents of change in what we call as learner guides. So those that have been supported through the system, alumni of the program, they go back to their communities and return to their local schools to deliver life skills that complement the academic curriculum, psychosocial support, and mentoring to a group of children to keep them in school and improve their learning outcomes. So they also do home visits. There are a link between the school and home. I saw what Safina was also showing in the home visits. That's also what they do. And they need mobility. And as CAMFED, we provide them with bicycles. They can go to the communities. If anyone has dropped out, they follow up and ensure that the learners are all back in school. We also believe that our programs should be led by the local communities. So we have got a grassroots-led approach that ensures that communities take responsibility for the welfare and success of the most vulnerable girls, so that they also do their matching as well and take responsibility. So ensuring that when we give a bicycle to a learner, they're taking care of it, they're ensuring the learner is traveling safe to on the routes that they're using, they're ensuring that they're doing basic maintenance for it, but obviously ensuring that they're taking ownership and believe in the importance of education. So we believe in investing in programs that are led by those who have experienced the problem that we're trying to address, and they are rooted in the communities that are being served, like our young women who are serving as guide. It makes a whole lot of difference to look at a holistic approach. Who else? It takes we have a saying in Africa and everywhere else to say it takes a village to raise a child. So looking at all what are the needs of the learners, of the girls, so that they can be able to go to school. We believe that the learners should take an interest in school. Why are they going to school? Because if sometimes you give them a bicycle, they might not go because they don't understand what is the need for them. So to ensure that they also, the community is rallying behind them. I saw the video from Educate a Child showing to learn the importance, that the community learns the importance of school and then encourage the girls. So in a nutshell, we believe in justice in education for every child, that every child deserves a chance to education, and we should take out all the barriers that are there, including the transport mobility, and that our commitment as an organization is to dismantle the barriers to girls getting into school, remaining in school, and succeeding. And such barriers, as I said, there can be a lot of them, and to ensure that all of them are covered. And we work with communities to do that. And our strategies are informed by our accountability to every individual girl. And we know that mobility is one of the challenges, a big challenge in Africa. And we also try to also ensure that we support them in that way as well, so that they learn and also thriving through. Thank you so much. That's it about CAMFED and the work we're doing in Africa. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Susan, and for those incredible numbers you shared about the reach and the Pan-African movement to get girls in school. I wrote the word accountability while you were talking, and that shared accountability model that you describe between the communities, the parents, governments, and the girls themselves is such a wonderful ripple effect. Let's turn now for even more information about the solution that bikes can bring to girls and communities. Winnie, are you online with us in my favorite city, my own city in Cape Town? Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you okay. Thanks, Lauren.
Oh, great. Are you able to turn on your camera, or the bandwidth doesn't allow?
Oh, apologies for that.
Yeah, we need to see your wonderful scarf. Winnie, you've been doing some research at World Bicycle Relief about exactly what Nicole and Susan have been talking about, and Safina too. Can you tell us a little bit about this research on mobility poverty, its impact on girls, and some of the suggestions that you have for us around the virtual screen?
Thanks very much, Lauren. I think Susan has done such an incredible job of talking about the impact of the bicycle, which is a tool that we believe as WBR that has the ability to transform lives, to change education outcomes, to transform communities, to reduce poverty. And because of this, over the last 16 years, WBR has distributed over 600,000 bicycles across various countries, particularly in rural communities, which are mainly faced by rural mobility constraints. And current countries of operation include Kenya, Colombia, Zambia, Zimbabwe, and Malawi. Over 70, we target girls mainly as the main beneficiary of our bicycles, at least in the education program. So we target about 70% of the bicycles are distributed to girls. And we do this for the reasons that have been raised by the panelists that have spoken before me, that girls are disproportionately affected by mobility constraints. So they travel long distances. We know in rural areas in particular, children have to wake up really early in the morning in order to make it to school on time. In addition to, they have to confront weather issues during their travel. They also have to confront safety issues during travel. So in the communities that we work with, we often find girls, but in particular, speaking about how unsafe they feel walking alone to and from school and even within their communities. Something else that Susan has brought up is the issue of children doing after school chores, so working at home. So in addition to long distance and spending a lot of time on travel, they then get home and they have to assist their households in chores such as fetching water, cooking, washing, and so forth. So we're dealing with children who are physically exhausted at the end of the day. And so we see the bicycle as a tool that can help reduce these effects of the mobility constraints on the child. And in our communities, what we've seen is that the bicycle has the ability to cut down on travel time by up to an hour, reducing the time that children spend traveling to and from school. And this finding is one of the many positive effects that we've seen from a study that we commissioned the Innovations for Poverty Action to conduct in Zambia. So this was an RCT study that was carried out in 2017, and we followed the impact of the bicycles over time. So we've compared girls who received bicycles versus those who did not. So taking a treatment and control approach in 3 districts in Zambia. And what we found through this study is a confirmation of the positive effects that have been spoken by the panelists, that for one, there was a 33% decrease in the time that children traveled to school. So travel time was cut by approximately 1 hour. That is significant in the context of these communities we're working with. Another positive effect was in an increase in punctuality. So we saw that children reported arriving at school on time. So obviously when children travel long distances, the likelihood of arriving in school late is higher, leading to the possibility of them missing out on some of the classes. So what we've seen through this study is that a 66% increase in punctuality and a reduction in the number of days that children are late in school. We've also seen positive effects in school attendance. So the number of children reporting missing school the previous month declined significantly not only in Zambia, but also in other communities across our countries of operation. We followed these girls over time from 2017 all the way until 2021. And in recent years, what we've also started to see emerge out of the data is the positive effects we see on school retention. So with COVID, we saw an increase in the number of, in the incidence of dropout rates across the world. And this is also something that Safina spoke about happening in India. This is something that has also been observed in the African context. And what we have observed in our study is that there's a less likelihood of girls who have the bicycles to drop out of school. So this is a very important finding on the potential of the bicycle to keep girls in school, make sure they are able to attend school and reduce the negative effects of physical exhaustion on them. So these are just some of the findings that we have seen out of our study. And I think my colleagues will also share a policy brief summarizing these findings from the RCT study but which we are also observing in other countries of operation.
Thank you so much, Winnie. I love how much detail you have around this. I particularly love what's coming across in this panel right now is how strong the evidence is in driving programs, whether by CAMFED or World Bicycle Relief. I think this is really a sea change in the types of programming we've seen over the years where we think we know what girls need. And now we're actually doing this based on very comprehensive, rigorous, high quality research. Winnie, I think we might have a video to also complement what you've been saying. It's our last one for today, but I love videos because they give us a real visual image. Kathleen, back to you. Thank you. Wow, World Bicycle Relief. What a video. I mean, the videos this morning, evening for others and afternoon for others too, are just amazing. Such powerful statistics. And yes, we want to see that counter keep running up. I know I have seen myself the power of a bicycle. So the chat on the right is really coming alive right now. I want to draw our attention to some of the questions and answers. For Winnie, if we can come back to you for a second, and also potentially Susan, a lot of the questions have been around how do we protect those assets and make sure they stay in a girl's hands? Many of us know from our work that once you try and give something to an adolescent girl, someone else tries to take it away, to put it bluntly. So Susan, you talked about community engagement and ownership. Perhaps you'd like to expand on what that actually looks like. What does it look like to engage communities and help them in ownership? Winnie, tell us a little bit more about how we support those girls so that that bike doesn't become a threat to their security and safety and yet another burden that they have to carry. Perhaps I'll go straight to Winnie and then come back to you, Susan.
Thanks very much, Lauren. I think my colleague Susan Boenstein has also been responding to some of the questions around the durability of the bikes and as well as how long the girls can get to keep the bicycles. I think one of the key issues that I also need to bring across is the fact that our community, we involve the community from end to end of the implementation of our programs. It's a very crucial part of our program. So we not only involve community members in the, we involve them from the participant selection, so how we identify the recipients through to the management of the actual program. And because of this, the likelihood of issues such as bicycles being taken away from the girls or stolen are actually minimized. So what we do is that in each community that we work with and in each school, we establish what we call a bicycle supervisory committee, which basically oversees the running of the program at community level. So the bicycle supervisory committee holds regular meetings to monitor the usage of these bicycles, to identify whether the bicycles still belong to the girls, whether they're using them, whether the bicycles are arriving at schools with the girls. And if that is not happening, do further investigations as to why this is not happening. In cases where bicycles have been stolen as well, the bicycle supervisory committee takes up that case and in some cases refers them to the police if the bicycle can't be found. So we have a very community-led approach and we have this community buy-in. So everyone in our communities of operation supports the program, from the teachers to the parents to the bicycle supervisory committee. And this is one of the main reasons why we've been very successful in keeping the bicycles with the girls, that they still use it when we monitor and we follow up a couple of years after we've given them the bicycle. So community buy-in is very important to us. I think there was also a question around how we maintain this bicycle. So in every community where we operate in, WBR has trained mechanics that provide preventive maintenance to these bicycles, as well as and help with process of replacing parts that have that are worn out. So we've got a very active maintenance maintenance program that is led by these mechanics that we've trained. And in the process, we've also provided these mechanics with employment, because they not only service WBR bicycles, they also service non-WBR bicycles. So we've got we've got a model that works for us. We've created a bicycle ecosystem where we've got the community bicycle supervisories working and overseeing the implementation of the program. We've got the mechanics providing preventative maintenance, and then we've got the supply of spare parts. So this is some of the ways in which we keep our program running successfully.
Thank you so much, Winnie. Wow, the bike ecosystem actually sounds like it's complemented by a girl ecosystem with a range of protective factors for the girl who's at the heart of this. Thank you. Susan, over to you.
Thank you, Lauren. I'll echo most what Winnie has said in terms of how we ensure that the assets that we give to the learners, not only the bicycles, as I said, we also give other financial support, scholastic material support to the girls we support. How do we ensure we have a buy-in? So as Lorena said, and I also, as I indicated in my area presentation, is that community-led approaches are the best approaches. So we have to involve the people that are experiencing the problem. The fact that they're not saying anything or not doing anything about it doesn't mean they don't have a say. They do. It's just that they are challenged maybe in terms of financial resources. But when you give them the power to them to say, this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing that, the importance of education, how it will change their children's lives, you get a buy-in from them. It also helps in sustainability. So they even go a step further to match what has been given. So even in terms of like training, as Win said, we give a basic training, artisan training to mechanics around the area, so they can help. But people will be willing to even come in and say, what else can we do to ensure that these bicycles are protected? No one takes them away from the girls. So there's ownership of the program when you involve the community. Instead of just maybe they seeing a child coming home with a bicycle, they'll even be surprised. And you have to involve them at every stage. And why you're doing that the bicycle is not for them to take it to markets or the father of the home, no, but it is for the girl to give them a chance, a gift of time, as I saw in Winnie's video, to give them a chance or a gift of time to ensure that they do well in their school. So yes, we see a lot of buy-in and a lot of protection of the bicycles when we involve the communities. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you for reminding us about those norms around time. In case anybody wants to know, we've actually looked at that at UNICEF and found that girls carry out 2 to 3 times more household chores than their male siblings, which is indeed a compromise of the time. I want to look back at you, Safina. If you had to be in front of a policymaker right now in this urgent time of education and girls being primarily affected by it, what else would you be recommending to policymakers, including potentially around these norms on time, the discrimination that you talked about? What do you think are some really important recommendations to policymakers and practitioners to address some of these barriers girls are facing?
Thank you, Lauren. So I think with the policymakers, a couple of things. One is, I think, just looking at the entire root cause piece. We talked about the 2 P's earlier, poverty and patriarchy. The overall 4 P's, poverty, patriarchy, policy, and the pandemic. And I think really, and a lot of our conversation with the governments have been around these 2 P's. One is really doing an analysis of all of our policies, let's say, aimed at children, and seeing where is there an inclusion gap? Where is it that girls are not being addressed, when you divide it by. So for example, you talked about food earlier. I think, Nicole was talking about how food is such a big element. So really looking at the fact that secondary schools don't have a feeding, a midday meal and stuff, which impacts girls very heavily. A lot of our studies and, work with girls says that any subjects that they do after lunch hour period, they have like a brain fog, can't study. So if math and science comes later, because you don't have a midday meal, and so for poor girls and stuff, that becomes a big barrier. So I think one is looking at, poverty and social protection schemes, and making sure that whether, for us, like a lot of the state governments are actually giving bicycles. So really advising and sitting down with the policymakers saying, where do we need to act? Where is it that we need to address poverty, whether it is waiving of exam fees, whether it is provision of any kind of conditional assets or scholarships that will aid in transition from, let's say, a middle school to senior secondary school or secondary school, etc. So one is just looking at that. The second is looking around patriarchy, which means, and I'll give an example here. What is really interesting is what we found a lot of the times is just giving a scholarship is one thing, but we find, or giving a bicycle is one thing, but we find, let's say the government is giving these out, and these are part of the social protection material support, etc. for the girls, is our advice to policymakers always is that wrap this in behavior change communication, because you have to address the underlying root causes of patriarchy. So if you're doing a scholarship and parents are coming in for a scholarship, the orientation must include norm shift communication, right? So that it isn't, because otherwise what happens is you'll give, the asset is consumed, but the behavior doesn't change. So the underlying root cause is never addressed. So one is just addressing the poverty aspects. The second is really addressing the patriarchy by wrapping everything in that norm shift communication, etc. The third is we are asking the government now to look at it from the lens of the pandemic, saying business as usual was one thing, which was this. With the pandemic, what is it new that you need to kind of do? So I'll talk you. So there are a couple of experiments that we're running, very, very, very interesting. So for example, with one of the state governments, we kind of have a small experiment going, saying, can we have a single window clearance at the school for all the social protection schemes the girl is eligible for? So instead of going to 4 different departments to get, because poor girls can never make it there, right? But what if the school was the delivery point, the single window that delivered all of this? So you're adding the value proposition of the school without any extra budgetary expenditure. So this is one thing that we are trying to build a proof of concept and show it to the government, is really how do you build, because it's very hard for them because each department has their own schemes. There's no convergence. So this is really a convergence saying, so one is like, look at the policies that are not being addressed. And then secondly is really, because of the pandemic, look at how you can converge. Look at how you can reduce the transaction friction that policy, that scheme, whatever you're offering gets to the girl really fast. And how do you make the stickiness with the school much, much more? So for example, one of our state governments is right now, through the pandemic, they've been giving, if you're enrolled in school, every month, girls can come in and they get 3 kilograms of rice and 1 kilogram of lentils. So again, using social protection stuff, but to increase the stickiness with the school. So I think that's what I would kind of really, when we sit with the policymakers, that's what we're doing, is we're laying out all the poverty, patriarchy, policy exclusion pieces in place, and also adding a layer of pandemic and saying, what is it that we can kind of do differently?
Thank you so much, Safina. What a actually, what you gave us was a multi-layered answer to exactly the challenge that I posed you, which is there is no single solution, and to really see the girl in the complexity of her life and help her on all fronts. Thank you too for pointing to social protection. I think that we're really seeing a wave across countries that now is the moment for social protection. We're seeing here in the US, for example, first time ever discussion around a universal child benefit, something none of us would ever have imagined. I know in my own country, South Africa, that universal child grant has actually kept children alive over the pandemic. And we're seeing more and more companies and businesses start talking about the importance of benefits for their female staff and families, subsidies, parental leave, and other things, childcare, to really help with things like early childhood education. So talking about the younger range now and the importance of investing in those early years. Nicole, I want to come back to you too. Do you want to talk about some of those other solutions? Perhaps you were inspired by what Safina said, that your research is picking up. I only gave you a very little time at the beginning, so maybe you want to spend a bit more time on those recommendations that your study pointed to, and particularly if you've got any recommendations around research that's urgently needed. What are still some of those research gaps that we're looking at?
Great, thank you so much. First of all, I agree with Safina. I think one of the most, the fundamental thing that policymakers can do is look at the data. I mean, I think look at where the gender gaps emerge, for example. I mean, that you see them at the end, but where do they start to happen? Is it because there's differential enrollment for girls and boys? Or is it that girls are dropping out of school more than boys? And you see different patterns in different settings, and that's at the national level, as well as, there's many different, within a country, there's really very diverse problem statements. So what might be, well, child marriage might be very high in one province, it might not be in another. And so having that nuance in response is really important. One size does not fit all. And the second thing that Safina said that I agree with, the pervasive toxicity of unequal gender norms is just through and through our systems and our lives. And for every program, I think it really behooves us to take a gender lens and think, okay, how can this be strengthened by increasing awareness, fostering critical thinking about what the gender norms are, what is depriving girls from, I forget who said it in the beginning, but I think it was in one of the videos, really depriving girls from opportunities and the opportunity to thrive. And so I completely agree. I do also feel there's a lot, however, that we advocate for sometimes in the gender and education space where the evidence isn't quite so robust. For example, one of the things we talked about was provision of menstrual health supplies. And while I agree, and I think most people would, that this is, important as a matter of dignity and perhaps of rights and comfort, in our review, we said more research is needed, but since then there's been a couple of other studies, one done by the Population Council in Kenya that found, and they did a very rigorous randomized control trial. They had 4 arms, a control arm that didn't receive anything. They had an arm that just received menstrual pads. They had an arm that just received reproductive health education, and they had an arm that received, the study arm that received both the pads and the reproductive health education. And while those that had the sexual reproductive health education had improved, I forget what, knowledge, they had better, some changes in attitudes. The menstrual pads did not add anything to those outcomes, and neither improved education outcomes, which is important to know, because it's important for policymakers to decide, okay, I have a limited amount of money, and where am I going to invest that limited money, to achieve the outcomes I want. And it's, not to say that every intervention has to have an education outcome. It can have other outcomes that are equally important around gender equity or whatever, but I think it's very important to be clear-eyed about what does and doesn't work. And so that is, so the role of menstrual health in education outcomes is an area that needs further research. Similarly, partially one of the struggles we had is because these issues are so intertwined, a lot of programs and it's our instinct as well, are multi-component, multi-layered. The problem is, though, when you go to evaluate them, it's like, well, what worked? What was it that made that work? Was it, was it the pads, or was it the education or the community mobilizing? Which of these things was really important, which is an important question for scale. If we're going to convince governments to take these things to scale, we have an obligation to try to figure out how to do that in the most cost-effective way. And so I think another area of research is to better tease out a little bit what some of these what the different elements are that really sort of move the needle. What are in creating change. And I think and then there's just areas where there's just not enough research for us to know whether it works or not, period. So for example, school-related gender-based violence, we know is a problem, it has to, there's rights issues here, like nobody should be in a space that is not safe. But how to do those best and how to make sure that they can improve education outcomes for girls as well is just lacking. There just haven't been studies that have looked at that specifically in a rigorous way. So I could go on and on. I feel like I've taken up too much time. So anyway, thank you for the opportunity.
You definitely have it, Nicole. And I see Safina wanted to finish your thought, perhaps. Safina, over to you.
Yes, I'm so sorry. Nicola, I wanted to come in, and I think I kind of want to remind everybody that I think research may not show menstrual hygiene products have educational outcome component, because there's certain things that are, not everything is attribution based, right? There are some things which contribute. If I was sitting there without a pad, bleeding through in the classroom, or having to roll up a dirty cloth with mud inside, it is still, it's about human rights, it's about dignity and all the rest of it. So, and if I was sitting with a policymaker, my question to them would be, you don't need an RCT to tell you this. You do not need an RCT. And I also feel like somewhere I have this great discomfort with the way we talk about what is fundable and what isn't. It's almost like, why do I have to make a case for girls' education by saying, oh, it'll impact the climate, poverty, da, 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 da. It is because it is a right. It's as simple as that. And to me, that still reeks of patriarchies when we have to make so many arguments about the return on investment and all the rest of it, just to say, give us our right. Nobody talks about the sports budget saying, giving a bat and ball. And believe me, most of the sports budget is spent on boys' sports, and girls are just kind of, whatever. But they don't make the case saying we need it because as boys, this is what we need to do. And yet we always have to make the case. So I kind of feel like even in rooms such as ours and in our discussion, the conversation is not a Hunger game saying, shall I give her a pad or give her a cycle? Damn it, give her both, right? The problem here is that patriarchy rules that we are always making the case in this really defensive way. And secondly, the case we need to make is 3% of your national budget on education is the goddamn problem, right? We need a war chest for this. Our children need all of this because it's a poor child. It's not Hunger Games that we're going to give them this, but not this. And and whatever. So I kind of feel like even at our level, we have to change those conversations. We present it in a way to policymakers where they think, oh, fine, I'm not going to give money for that, but I will give money for this. But I think our poorest children actually need 10 times the investment than our richest kids do, versus the other way. So I think all of our conversation really needs to be about saying, put a war chest behind this, otherwise you're losing a generation. And you know, for me, it's common sense. I'm not even concerned whether there would be research there or not research there, because all of us have gone through this. And, you know, so I'm just saying, like, I feel this discomfort sometimes saying, are we ruled by patriarchy in a way that we're always trying to say, well, I am worth it, you know, look at my return on investment if you kind of give me this. So anyway, sorry.
Please don't apologize. I think we all feel it all the time, you know, that the fact that we have to make an investment case constantly, that we're having to convince policymakers, even now when we feel it in our own homes, the urgency of education for our children, even in privileged homes in high and middle income countries, children's education has been affected. And yet there's a complete lack of urgency around restoring that education to the world's children. So I think what you've done is remind us of that urgency, that we shouldn't be having to make those kind of tough choices. It isn't a choice. It's a right. And it's always hard for me. I look at the research sometimes about an educated woman will in turn feed her children better. But it doesn't say an educated boy will in turn take better care of his family. And that's very striking in all the studies that are published. So that absence of what we don't say and the choices we make in the presentations of our research. And Nicole, I loved what you talked about, which is really the paucity of operational research, the how-to. How can we as practitioners have better programs if we don't know what is actually working? And I think there's certainly a yawning gap on this. So thank you so much. Perhaps because our limited funds are being taken up with investment cases, which shouldn't be necessary. I want to just, we have about 3 minutes left, just enough time to whiz around our fantastic panel. I want you to be as fiery and explicit as you can, inspired by our amazing other panelists. If you could leave us with one sentence around what needs to happen right now, what would you be recommending to the world's policymakers, to practitioners, to researchers for investment in terms of girls' education and tackling some of those barriers? I also want to acknowledge the amazing chat that's happening simultaneously. World Bicycle Relief, you've inspired many online who I'm sure are going to be getting in touch with you after this conversation. I also want to thank board members, Orion and others who are online. Really appreciate your support to this work. So one sentence each, panelists, in closing, what would you like to leave our audience with? Who shall I start with? Winnie, how about you?
Thanks, Lauren. I think for me, it's at the core of our work, basically. It's invest in transportation and mobility, invest in the bicycle. We've seen from us, we have shown that the bicycle is a tool that can make girls feel safer. They can travel quicker to school. It has massive significant effects at school, but also outside school and also to their families in general. So we see transportation as a key aspect of women's lives, children's lives that we really need to invest in. And we, just like we look at girls' rights as education and the right to education, we also need to think about the right to transportation, which is something that's always often overlooked. So we focus so much on infrastructure, for example, building new schools, but we don't think about how to improve transportation for these kids. So invest in transportation.
Thank you, Winnie. I'm working backwards. Susan, you next.
Thanks, Lauren. I agree with everyone who has spoken about girls' education, that it is a right. As Camfed, we believe that education is an entry point to so many things, changing lives, leadership skills, transformative impact that we've seen in the community. So it's good to invest in education of the girl and support them in all the areas that they need for them to go to school, break all the barriers, including social norms where boys are preferred over girls. Girls also needs to be given a chance, and we have seen visible evidence of what happens when a girl is supported to go to school. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Susan. Nicole, to you.
No, thank you so much. I would just say we right now are failing our children so catastrophically in the education space, and everything we can do, this study that World Bicycle Relief did, the work that Susan and Safina are doing, it's so critical, and keep it up. Yeah, there's the learning poverty and the lack of education is a profound disinvestment in girls.
Thank you, Nicole. Safina.
You know, Tom Cruise is my most favorite actor. This is something my girls tease me about all the time, but I'm going to say, show me the money, as he says in one of his movies, because honestly, at the end of the day, I want Camphor to get $10 billion to do what they need to do. And I think business as usual is not going to cut it. The pandemic, the biggest brunt has been borne by our girls. And we really need policymakers, we need governments, we need philanthropists to step up and show us the money, because that's what it's at. It's not, really, we need to increase investment, and business as usual is not going to cut it. We need a war chest.
Thank you, Safina. I couldn't have ended more perfectly. I'm going to turn to Atalanta to bring us to a close, but allow me to just see if I can pull some threads together from this amazing, lively, and dynamic conversation. I even was able to stop drinking my coffee because you woke me up so much. And I think what we got from today is what many of us are really not sleeping at night over. It certainly is a huge worry for us at UNICEF. We are failing the world's children right now. There is a massive education crisis right now in our homes, in our countries, and it's not being sufficiently prioritized. There's insufficient pressure on governments to reopen schools and reopen schools better. The second thing we talked about today was that when those schools are open, they need to be offering much more than just quality learning, which is already a problem. By the way, something like 70% of Africa's children are illiterate at age 10. I mean, so even when they are going to school, they're not learning, and they're not learning the right things. We need more support for menstrual health and hygiene as a fundamental right. We need to really work in an integrated way to get that girl in school, make sure she's learning the right things, and that she's surrounded by the kinds of care and support she needs, given the multiple problems that she's confronting in her daily life, not least in her own home before she gets to school. We heard about the incredible solutions that bicycles can offer, the gift of time, and the importance of embedding those solutions in a community strategy so that there's ownership for the girl's education overall, not least the assets that she has. And we also heard about the importance of no single solution. Safina, Nicole, others pointed to things like social protection, working with governments on broader policies to really tackle, what was the term, Safina, you used? Wrapping any solution in behavior change and norms change work. So I am leaving the conversation inspired and energized that there are amazing people and organizations out there. Yes, 10 billion for everybody. I'm also inspired by the chat, by those who are engaging in this conversation. Thank you, everybody who joined, who wants to invest further in solutions and partner with these incredible organizations we heard from today. Atalanta, back to you. Oh, you're on mute, Atalanta, which would be a terrible thing.
I wanted to say, Lauren, thank you so much. You summarized beautifully. I had made all those notes. You did it all for me. So I'm very, very grateful for you. I'm leaving the conversation totally energized and in a way, in assuring us at Giving Women that these panel discussions are so important, because we're not just talking. There is an incredible sharing of knowledge, an incredible exchange, and a convening of collaboration between the researchers, between the people on the ground, between our community, to see how we can move forward and really make a difference. I think you made the point that we need money to go there. Money needs, it's an important part of it. And we have some wonderful organizations here today, which could really, we know, employ that money in a very, very important way. But I think we also talked a lot about the importance of really identifying where those gaps are. Why are girls not getting that kind of education that they need to get? And it is extremely complex. One of them is very much the access which is denied them through distance. But that's, as Safina very nicely said, wrapped in so many other issues around poverty, around gender norms. And I think that if the call to working to change policy can only be effective if we also recognize to make those policies implemented on the ground, we have to have that messaging around the changing of those norms. And I always give the example about India. India ended the caste system, I think in 1948, was it? Somewhere around there. And we still have a caste system. I mean, not legally, but it's still there. Why? Because that communication has not happened. That changing at the grassroots of those norms of patriarchy are really not happening. And so we need to do this in a way that is much more collaborative, enriched, from the policymakers to the ground and everybody together. So this is what we try to do at Giving Women, is bring all these people together to have these conversations and leave with this strong feeling of working together. And as my favorite mantra, and I say it all the time now, is I believe in the power of one, but I believe in the magic of many. And I think this is what we have around this screen today. And I would like to thank you all. And I call on everybody to action. Thank you so, so much, everybody. Thank you.
You can unmute yourselves if you wish.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we will be sharing the recording in the coming days.
Yeah, and we'll be sharing the links as well, so that if you weren't able to get the links, you will receive them on our follow-up.
Thank you. Thank you
Thank
all.
you.
Have a
so
great
much.
day, evening.
Thanks.